What the hell is this? Get out! Get out of my lobby! Diane Calloway's heels cracked against marble like gunshots. She crossed the floor in 4 strides, finger already pointed like a weapon. Are you lost or just stupid? Maids don't stand in the front lobby. Maids go through the back, like the rest of the trash. The trainees froze, eyes on the floor. Look at you, dirty uniform, ashy hands. You smell like bleach and poverty. She leaned in, voice like a blade. Close your mouth. Move your cart. Disappear. That's all you'll ever be good for. She turned away before Ursula could breathe, because in Diane's mind, you don't wait for a maid to respond. Ursula stood still, said nothing. But behind those steady eyes, something was waiting. 2 days before Wei Long Feng arrived, the email came. Priya Nolan at the front desk read it twice, then a third time. Then she printed it and walked straight to Gregory Hartwell's office. The entire 34th floor, 5 nights, a delegation of 6, and a 3-page list of requirements, written entirely in Mandarin. Gregory read it slowly, set it down, picked it up again. Diane was already in the doorway, arms crossed, completely unbothered. I'll have the concierge team handle it. There are apps for this. It'll be fine. Gregory looked at her, then back at the document. 26 years in hospitality had taught him one thing. Fine and 5-star were not the same word. Not even close. But Diane was already walking away. That afternoon, 2 concierge staffers stood in the hallway outside the 32nd floor supply room. Phones out, panic rising. One of them stabbed at a translation app, read the result, winced. That doesn't even make sense, the other one said. It's close enough. It is not close enough. This man is worth $4 billion. They kept fumbling, kept guessing. The app kept failing. 40 feet away, Ursula Monroe was restocking shelves in the supply closet. She could hear everything through the thin wall. She stopped. She listened. And without thinking, without even realizing she was doing it, her lips began to move. Silently, precisely, forming every word the app was butchering in the exact tones the app couldn't find. She caught herself, closed her mouth, went back to folding towels. But here's what nobody saw. Tucked under those towels, beneath the stack of fresh linens on her cart, a small paperback book, worn soft from years of handling, spine cracked, pages bent at the corners. A Chinese dictionary. Not a tourist phrase book, not a beginner's guide. The real thing. Read, reread, and memorized. She slid it deeper under the towels before stepping back into the hallway. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever noticed. But why did she hide it? Wei Long Feng walked through the front doors of the Aldbourne Grand on a Thursday morning, and the entire lobby changed register. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was quieter than that. The piano in the corner kept playing. The front desk kept moving. But something shifted, the way a room shifts when someone enters who has never once needed to raise their voice to be obeyed. He was 61, charcoal suit, black leather notebook. 6 people behind him moving in perfect formation. Diane Calloway was at the front, smile locked on like a stage light. Behind her, Tyler, a well-meaning 24-year-old assigned as cultural liaison, stood with the translation app open on his phone. His hands weren't shaking, but they wanted to. Bo Renchan stepped forward first. He was Wei's senior associate, the man who handled every detail so Wei never had to. Bo spoke directly to Diane, fast, formal, clipped. The Mandarin of boardrooms, not airports. He was asking about the room setup, the temperature, a specific tea, the furniture arrangement his team had submitted in advance. Tyler raised the phone. The app translated 40 seconds of precise instruction into 7 words. He want room cold, tea, table move? Beau's expression didn't change, but his eyes did. Wei glanced at the phone, then at Diane. He said absolutely nothing. He didn't need to. Gregory Hartwell stood at the edge of the lobby, a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, and felt the temperature of the entire interaction drop. Ursula was 40 feet away. She was changing out a flower arrangement near the elevator bank. White orchids, eucalyptus stems. She had been there for 6 minutes. Not one person had looked at her. She heard every word. Her hands kept working, lifting a stem, repositioning a branch, but her eyes cut sideways, just once, to Beau Rinchan's face. She wasn't just hearing the words, she was reading everything underneath them. The frustration building behind the composure, the specific requests that hadn't landed, the one detail, still unaddressed, that mattered more than Tyler or Diane or anyone else in that lobby understood. She knew exactly what Beau had said. She knew exactly what was lost. And she knew that if that one detail stayed missed, Wei Longfeng would check out quietly before sunset. Not angry, not loud, just gone. And the hotel would never fully understand why. Ursula said nothing. She finished the arrangement, set down the last stem, picked up her cart, and walked toward the service elevator. The service elevator doors were sliding shut behind her when she heard it. Wei Longfeng, standing near the front desk, said something quiet to Beau. Not angry, not directed at anyone. Just 4 words, almost to himself. Something that meant, nobody here truly understands. Ursula's hand went to the elevator door. She held it open for 1 full second. Then she let it close. The lobby carried on. Diane kept smiling. Tyler kept staring at his phone. The piano kept playing. And Gregory Hartwell, who had been watching the lobby the entire time, realized his eyes had drifted. Not to Wei, not to Beau, not to the crisis unfolding at the front desk, to the housekeeper near the elevator bank. He watched the doors close behind her, stood there a moment longer than necessary. Something about the way she moved, the way she held herself, the way she had gone completely still at exactly the right moment. He couldn't name it yet. He picked up his cold coffee and walked back to his office. But he didn't forget it. Some things stay with you precisely because you can't explain them. And Gregory Hartwell had spent 26 years learning to pay attention to exactly those things. That evening, Ursula sat in the staff locker room and called her daughter. Amara was 9 years old, staying with her grandmother in Inglewood. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always did when she knew her mother had a long day. "Mom, did you speak Mandarin today?" Ursula laughed. The real kind. Tired and warm at the same time. "Not today, baby." "Why not?" She zipped her bag. Looked at herself in the locker mirror for 1 moment longer than necessary. Because today wasn't the day. Amara accepted that the way children accept things they don't yet understand, but somehow already trust. Ursula hung up, sat in the quiet, and let herself remember. She grew up in Inglewood, on Chicago's South Side. Her mother cleaned offices. Her father drove a delivery truck until his back gave out. Neither of them finished college. What they gave her instead was a library card, a fierce stubbornness about learning, and a grandmother named Celestine, who had spent 12 years cooking for a Chinese diplomat family in Washington, D.C., and came home speaking Mandarin like it was second nature. Celestine started teaching Ursula at age 4, not from textbooks, from conversation, from being scolded and praised in a language that lived in the body before it lived in the mind. By 16, Ursula was nearly fluent. By 20, she was studying at professional level. Library books, borrowed tapes, whatever she could find. She applied to 3 translation programs, got into 1. She deferred enrollment twice, first for her mother's illness, then for Amara's birth. And somewhere in all that deferring, the years moved on without her. The worn dictionary on her cart wasn't nostalgia, it was maintenance. She kept the language alive the way someone tends a fire in a house where no one else feels cold, privately, persistently, and without expecting thanks. Her grandmother used to say, "A language is a door. You carry the key. Whether anyone opens it for you, that's their loss, not yours." Ursula believed that, most days. Friday morning. Ursula's rotation put her on floors 32 through 35, which meant she was responsible for Wei's floor. She arrived at 7 a.m. with her cart, the hallway still quiet, the carpet muffling every sound. As she passed suite 3401, she heard voices inside. Not angry, distressed. The kind of voices that belong to people who have run out of options and are starting to feel it. The door was open 2 inches. She knocked on the door frame and waited. Bo Renshan opened it. He looked at her. Uniform, cart, folded towels stacked to her chin, and started to close it again. Then Ursula spoke, not in English. "Sir, I heard some sounds. Is there anything I can help with?" Bo's hand froze on the door. He stared at her for a long moment, like a man recalibrating something he thought he already understood. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. The problem was serious. That evening, Wei was hosting a private business dinner for 8 guests, 2 of them senior partners. His team had submitted detailed instructions weeks in advance. The setup required a specific serving arrangement, a particular order of dishes, and a seating orientation tied to customs that mattered deeply in the context of Chinese business culture. The hotel's events team had gotten almost all of it wrong. Not out of disrespect, out of ignorance. They had read the instructions through a translation app and guessed at the rest. Bo explained everything rapidly. He wasn't unkind, he was desperate. Ursula listened without interrupting. When he finished, she repeated the requirements back to him, every detail, in the correct order, with 2 clarifying questions about the serving sequence. Bo's expression moved through several things in quick succession. Surprise, disbelief, and then something quieter, the specific relief of finally being understood. She didn't call Diane, didn't fill out a request form, didn't go through any channel that would slow things down or draw attention to herself. She found Terence Okafor on the floor below, pressed a handwritten note into his hand, and spoke low and fast. "Take this to the events team. Tell them the corrections came directly from the guests' people. Walk fast." Terence looked at the note, then at Ursula. Are you speaking Mandarin?" She was already pushing her cart back toward the supply closet. "Keep moving, Terence." "Ursula, hey, Ursula!" But she was already gone. That evening, the private dinner on the 34th floor went perfectly. Every detail in place, every custom observed. Bo Renshan stood at the entrance to the dining room and surveyed the setup for a long, silent moment before allowing the guests inside. Something in his posture eased. The specific loosening of a man who had spent 3 days bracing for things to go wrong, and was now, cautiously, quietly, allowing himself to believe they might not. Wei noticed. He always noticed. He said nothing. The evening was a success, and not one person in hotel management knew why. Not yet. But somewhere on the 32nd floor, Terence Okafor was standing at the end of a hallway, staring at nothing, replaying a 30-second conversation in his head, and arriving at a conclusion that made absolutely no sense, and yet made complete sense at the same time. He pulled out his phone, started typing a message, then stopped, put the phone away. Some things you sit with before you say out loud. Terrence made it until Saturday morning. That was how long he managed to keep it to himself. 18 hours, which for Terrence Okafor was practically a record. He was at the front desk talking to Priya Nolan about nothing in particular when it just came out. Casual, almost offhand. You know, Ursula on housekeeping sorted the whole dinner situation last night, right? She spoke to them in Mandarin, like actual Mandarin. Priya stopped typing, turned slowly. She what? Full conversation. Corrected the entire setup. I was standing right there. Priya stared at him for a moment, then she looked down at her keyboard, then back up at Terrence. Does Diane know? Terrence's expression answered that question before he could. Diane Calloway found out within the hour. She didn't storm, she didn't raise her voice. She did something worse. She waited until the mid-morning lull, walked into the service corridor where Ursula was restocking a supply cart, and closed the distance between them with the slow, deliberate patience of someone who has never once doubted their own authority. I heard about last night, Diane said. Her voice was pleasant, terrifyingly pleasant. I want to be very clear with you. What you did, going around the events team, communicating directly with the guest, that is not your role. That is not something you do again. Ever. Ursula held the cart handle, said nothing. I appreciate initiative, I do, but there is a chain of command in this building for a reason. You are housekeeping. If something needs to be communicated to a guest, you come to me. You don't freelance. You don't improvise. You stay in your lane. She tilted her head slightly. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. Diane held the look for one extra beat, just long enough to make sure it landed, then turned and walked away, heels sharp against the tile floor, unhurried. Ursula stood at her cart and stared at the floor. White tiles, hexagonal, cold. This wasn't new. That was a thing nobody understood from the outside. This was never new. 4 years ago, she had submitted a note to HR. 1 page, polite, professional, carefully worded. She had suggested she might be useful as an informal cultural liaison when guests from Mandarin-speaking regions were in residence. She had listed her background, her years of study. She had kept it brief because she knew brevity was safer. HR forwarded it to Diane. Diane filed it under Miscellaneous Staff Suggestions. It was never acknowledged. Not a reply, not even a standard "thank you for your feedback" form letter. 2 years after that, she was refilling the water station at the back of a department meeting she wasn't supposed to be in. The concierge manager was midway through a presentation. He said, clearly and without irony, "We really need to source some Mandarin-speaking staff. It's a genuine gap we cannot keep ignoring." Ursula was standing 6 feet from the back wall. She did not raise her hand. That evening, she sat in her car in the parking structure for 11 minutes before she could make herself drive home. She wasn't crying. She was just still. The dictionary was in her bag. She took it out. Held it the way you hold something that has cost you more than anyone else will ever know. Her grandmother's voice, her grandmother's hands, a language learned in a kitchen in Washington, D.C., carried across decades and geography, and delivered into a supply closet on the 32nd floor of a hotel where nobody thought to ask. She put the dictionary back, started the car. Some fires burn for a very long time before anyone sees the light. Sunday morning, 8:47 a.m. Priya Nolan was at the front desk when the call came in. She listened, nodded twice, then set the phone down very carefully, the way people set things down when they're trying not to panic, and walked directly to Diane Calloway's office. The interpreter was not coming. Flight delay. No backup, no contingency, nothing. The meeting was at 11 a.m. Wei Longfeng's team had converted the 34th floor conference room into a private business space. A Chicago development group was coming in, 8 people total, a deal that had taken 14 months to arrange. And the professional interpreter who was supposed to bridge the entire thing was sitting in a terminal at O'Hare watching his connection disappear off the departures board. Diane stood very still when Priya told her. Then she picked up her phone and started making calls. The agency had no replacement available. 2 freelancers she knew personally didn't answer. A third was in Seattle. She looked at Tyler, who had been hovering near the doorway in case he was needed, and Tyler looked immediately at the floor. The clock on the wall read 9:04 a.m. Gregory Hartwell stood in his office doorway and watched the corridor outside fill with the specific energy of people who have run out of ideas but haven't yet admitted it. He had seen this before, 26 years of it. He knew exactly what it looked like, and he knew exactly how it ended when nobody made a hard call in time. He picked up his radio. "Where is Ursula Monroe right now?" The front desk checked the housekeeping rotation. "Floor 32, Mr. Hartwell, finishing her morning round." "Ask her to come to my office, please." Diane, who was close enough to hear, turned slowly. "Greg, I'll explain in a minute," he said, and walked back to his desk. Ursula had never been to Gregory Hartwell's office for anything good. 6 years at the Aldbourne Grand, and every summons to management had meant a policy reminder, or a scheduling issue, or once, memorably, a guest complaint about a cart left in a hallway for 4 minutes too long. She knocked on the open door and stood in the frame. Gregory looked up, gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit down." She sat, straight-backed, hands in her lap. He didn't perform urgency, didn't shuffle papers or check his watch. He simply looked at her directly and spoke. "I've heard from 2 separate people that you speak Mandarin, not app Mandarin, real Mandarin. Is that accurate?" A beat. "Yes, sir." "How well?" "Fluently, formal and conversational, some regional dialect exposure." Gregory nodded. No raised eyebrows, no visible surprise. Just a man taking in information and deciding what to do with it. That quality, treating what she said as fact rather than spectacle, was something Ursula had not expected. It landed differently than she was prepared for. "I need an interpreter for an 11 a.m. meeting," he said. "It matters, significantly. I'll compensate you properly and make sure it's reflected in your file. But I need to know right now. Are you willing?" Ursula looked at him. She had imagined a version of this moment before. Not here. Not like this. Not in a gray uniform with a cart parked outside the door. But she had imagined it. "Yes," she said. "I'll need 20 minutes to prepare." Gregory almost smiled. "You'll have 30. She stood, picked up her notepad from her pocket, and walked out of his office like someone who had just remembered exactly who they were. Gregory found Diane in the corridor outside the conference room 10 minutes later. He told her simply and directly. Ursula Monroe would be interpreting the 11 a.m. meeting. Diane's response came carefully, professionally, carefully. The kind of careful that people use when they cannot say what they actually mean. "Greg, with all respect, she's housekeeping. We don't know her credentials. We don't know her level. If something goes wrong in that room, it's not just the meeting. It's the entire relationship with Wei's group. Are you sure you want to take that risk?" Gregory looked at her for a moment. "Something has already gone wrong," he said quietly. "We have no interpreter, and 50 minutes until the most important meeting this hotel has hosted in 3 years. Ursula is fluent, she is prepared, and she is the best option we have in the time we have. He paused. I'm making this call. He turned and walked toward the conference room. Diane stood in the corridor and watched him go. Inside the room, the Chicago Development Group had already arrived. 4 of them. Dark suits, leather folders, the particular restlessness of people who bill by the hour and don't like waiting. They looked up when Gregory entered, looked past him at Ursula, still in her gray uniform, notepad in hand. The oldest one, navy suit, silver hair, opened his mouth. Gregory's look from across the table closed it again. He introduced Ursula without apology and without over-explanation. This is Ursula Munro. She will be interpreting today's session. That was all. The tone made elaboration unnecessary. Bo Renshin entered 2 minutes later, ahead of Wei. He scanned the room with the efficiency of a man who assessed situations for a living. His eyes moved across the development group, across Gregory, and then landed on Ursula. He went very still. Then he said something, quietly, almost to himself. It's you, the person from the hallway. Ursula met his eyes. Yes, sir. Today I can help properly. Bo Renshin did something his face apparently didn't do often in professional settings. He smiled. The development group didn't understand what had just passed between them. Gregory understood enough. He stepped back toward the rear of the room and stayed there. His role now was not manager, it was witness. He had made his call. He trusted it. Wei Longfeng entered last. He took his seat, opened his black leather notebook, and glanced once, briefly, without expression, at the woman in the gray uniform standing at the interpreter's position. Then he looked down at his notes, and the room settled. Ursula stood at the head of the interpreter's position. No podium, no nameplate, not a single credential visible anywhere on her person. Just a notepad, a pen, and 20 years of a language she had kept alive in supply closets and library books and late-night phone calls with a 9-year-old who always asked the same question. She had waited a long time for the right day. It was here now. There were 2 minutes before the meeting formally began. Bo Renshin approached Ursula at the side table, where she was reviewing the one-page agenda Gregory's assistant had slid under the bathroom door 30 minutes earlier. Bo spoke quietly, without formality, the way people speak when they have dropped the professional layer just briefly enough to say something real. The dinner 2 nights ago, that was you as well? Ursula looked up at him. The specifications came from your team. I only made sure they were heard correctly. Bo considered that. The way he considered it, slowly, without rushing toward a response, told her he was a man who thought before he spoke. She respected that. Mr. Wei noticed, Bo said. He said the arrangement was done with knowledge, not guesswork. Ursula said nothing, but something in her expression shifted. Not pride exactly, something quieter than pride. The specific feeling of having done something well in a room where nobody was supposed to see you, and finding out that someone did. Where did you learn? Bo asked. My grandmother. He nodded, once, slowly, and in his eyes was something that had nothing to do with business, and nothing to do with the meeting about to begin. It was recognition. The look of someone who has also carried something important across a long distance and in an unlikely place. And who knows, without needing it explained, exactly what that costs. They stood in a moment of complete quiet, in a room full of people preparing to talk. Then Bo turned to take his seat. But before he did, his eyes dropped to the corner of Ursula's notepad, just for a second. She had written a single character there, small and automatic, the way people write things they've written 10,000 times without thinking. The character for endurance, for patience, for bearing what must be borne. Bo looked at the character, then at Ursula. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. He simply returned to his seat with the careful composure of a man who had just seen something he would not forget. Across the lobby, visible through the conference room's glass wall, Terence Okafor was pretending to organize a luggage cart. He had been pretending for 6 minutes. His hands weren't really moving. His eyes were fixed on the woman in the gray uniform standing at the head of the room. No title, no credentials, not one single marker of authority, except the way she held herself. He stopped pretending to organize the cart. He just stood there and watched. His eyes were a little too bright. The meeting opened at 11:02 a.m. Floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago skyline, Lake Michigan a pale silver line at the edge of everything. The scent of jasmine tea and fresh coffee mixing in the air-conditioned quiet. 8 people at a mahogany table, and Ursula Munro standing at the interpreter's position. No chair, no podium. Because she had read once in a library book about professional interpreting that standing interpreters are harder to ignore. Wei Longfeng opened with a formal statement. His voice was measured, unhurried, carrying the weight of someone who had sat in rooms like this for 40 years and never once needed to perform authority. His first words meant, "I am glad that finally someone can truly listen." Ursula translated it exactly, clearly, without softening a single syllable. She looked directly at the Chicago Development Group as she delivered it. The word finally landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. One of the men across the table shifted in his chair. Good, Ursula thought. Feel it. The first 20 minutes moved well. Wei's Mandarin was the Mandarin of formal business, precise, layered, occasionally classical in ways that demanded cultural fluency, not just language. Ursula matched it beat for beat. She translated not just the words, but the register, the weight behind them, the diplomatic architecture of every sentence. The development group leaned in. They were listening differently than they had at the start. She could feel the shift happening in real time. The moment a room stops tolerating a presence and starts depending on it. Then Wei used an idiom, 4 characters, classical, meaning searching for a horse using only its picture, applying rigid rules without understanding the living thing in front of you. He was, with exquisite politeness, telling the Chicago group their initial proposal was too rigid, too templated, too far from the reality of how his organization actually operated. A machine would have translated it as something about a horse and a picture. A less experienced interpreter might have softened it entirely, smoothed it into something easier to swallow and easier to ignore. Ursula said, "Mr. Wei is noting that the proposal shows strong familiarity with the framework, but would benefit from more contextual flexibility. He is referencing a classical expression about the limits of working purely from templates." She had translated the meaning, the register, the diplomatic criticism, and the respect embedded within that criticism, all in a single breath. Wei gave one small nod, the nod of a man who has finally been accurately heard. The development group's lead pulled his notepad closer and wrote something down. His colleague leaned over to read it. Both of them nodded. The temperature of the room, which had started at cautious and professional, moved a degree warmer. Ursula stayed exactly where she was, still, unhurried, letting the room settle around the words she had just placed inside it. 30 minutes in, Wei asked a direct question, aimed not at the council, not at Gregory, but at Ursula specifically. He wanted a plain language explanation of how the partnership structure would function in practice, not in contract language, in real terms. Ursula turned to the council. Mr. Wei would like a practical explanation of the operational structure, how it functions day to day, not as written in the agreement. Then she turned back to Wei. Sir, I am asking them to explain in direct terms. She had done something the room didn't fully register in the moment. but would think about afterward. She protected Wei's intelligence, framing his question as a request for clarity, not confusion. She protected the council's standing, giving him the opportunity to explain rather than implying he had been unclear. And she kept the conversation moving forward rather than backward. The council gave a clear, direct answer. Ursula translated it with the same precision. Wei listened, nodded twice, picked up his pen again. Gregory Hartwell, at the back of the room, allowed himself one slow breath. 40 minutes in, the meeting shifted to contract specifics. The Chicago Group's lead counsel presented a particular clause: standard language in development deals, structural majority equity, the kind of language that appears in hundreds of contracts and means, simply, that one party holds the larger ownership stake in a partnership framework. Bo Renchan translated it for Wei, and he used the wrong word. Not wrong in a careless way, wrong in a precise, consequential way. The Mandarin word he chose carried a different weight, something closer to dominance, to control in the adversarial sense, rather than the structural and neutral sense the council had intended. Wei's pen stopped moving. It was a small thing, invisible to everyone in the room except the one person who had spent 20 years learning exactly how much a single word could carry. The council kept talking. The development group kept nodding. The room looked identical to how it had looked 30 seconds ago. But Ursula had heard it. She understood immediately what Bo's word implied. And she understood, with complete and terrible clarity, what would happen if this moment passed without correction. Wei Longfeng would finish this meeting with perfect courtesy. He would shake every hand at the table. He would return to his suite, and he would quietly instruct Bo to begin exploring other options, in another city, with another group. He would never say why. The Chicago team would never know what changed. The deal would simply cease to exist. 14 months of work, 8 people in a room, a skyline full of morning light. All of it balanced on one word that nobody else had caught. Ursula had a single choice to make, right now, in front of everyone. She could stay in her lane, the lane Diane Calloway had spent 6 years assigning her, and let the moment pass. Or she could do what she had always been capable of doing. She looked at Wei directly. Her voice was calm, respectful, completely certain. "Sir, with respect, allow me to clarify the translation. The term used here refers to structural majority equity. It is contractual language describing a partnership framework. It is not a statement about the nature of the relationship between the parties. The intent is cooperation, not control." The room went completely silent. The council stopped mid-sentence. The development group looked at each other. Bo Renchan's expression was unreadable. Gregory Hartwell at the back of the room had stopped breathing entirely. Wei Longfeng looked at Ursula. 1 second. 2. 3. The entire meeting. 14 months, 8 people, a skyline full of light, balanced on those 3 seconds, like something resting on the very edge of a table. Then Wei opened his pen and continued writing in his notebook. The council exhaled, slowly, quietly, like a man who had just watched something very close to catastrophe reverse direction and was not yet sure he fully understood how. He looked at Ursula. "Thank you," he said, genuine, completely unscripted. The thank you of someone who understood exactly what had just been handed back to him. Bo Renchan turned to Ursula and gave her one formal nod, deliberate, unhurried. The nod of one professional to another, across a table that had no reason to connect them and yet just had. The meeting continued, and as it did, something in the room had shifted in a way that could not be undone. The development group was no longer looking past Ursula. They were looking at her. The gray uniform had not changed. Her nameplate had not changed. Nothing visible about her was different at all. But the room knew now what it was dealing with. Near the end of the meeting, Wei said something quietly, low enough that only Ursula could hear. It meant, "Where did you learn?" "From my grandmother, sir," she said. Wei looked at her uniform, then at her face. He held that for a moment, the distance between those two things and everything that distance contained. He said nothing more, but he closed his notebook slowly, with care. The care of someone who understood that certain things deserved to be preserved. And Ursula Munro stood at the interpreter's position, gray uniform, no title, not one credential visible, in a room full of suits and leather folders and combined net worths that could buy a small country, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, exactly the right size. The meeting concluded at 1:14 p.m. The Chicago Development Group signed the preliminary framework agreement, handshakes, the usual theater of conclusion, folders closing, pens capping, the collective exhale of people who had come in uncertain and were leaving with something solid. The lead counsel stopped at the door on his way out. He turned back, looked at Ursula, still standing, still in gray, notepad tucked under her arm. "I don't know what your title is here," he said, "but what you did in that room today, that was professional grade work. More than professional grade." He paused, as if searching for the right word and finding it wasn't enough. "Thank you." Ursula nodded, said thank you, waited for them to leave. Then she stood alone in the conference room. The skyline was bright through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Lake Michigan, pale silver, unchanged. The jasmine tea had gone cold. Someone had left a pen on the table. The chairs were slightly askew from where people had pushed back to stand. She allowed herself 30 seconds, just 30. She stood at the window and looked out at the city she had grown up in, the city she had never left, the city that had asked so little of her for so long. Then she picked up her notepad, clicked her pen, and walked out. Gregory Hartwell was waiting in the hallway. Just him, no one else. No audience, no camera, no gesture toward the moment's significance. Just a man standing outside a conference room with his hands in his pockets, waiting for the person he needed to speak to. "Thank you," he said. "What you did today, that was exceptional. Not adequate, not sufficient. Exceptional." Ursula looked at him carefully. The way someone looks at praise when they have spent years learning to check whether it comes with conditions attached. Gregory saw the look. He understood exactly what it meant. "I also owe you an apology," he said. "On behalf of this hotel, you submitted a note to HR 4 years ago. It should have received a response. It didn't. That was a failure of process, of leadership, and of basic professional respect, mine included." He held her gaze. "I intend to correct it." The hallway was quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. The distant sound of the elevator arriving at the floor. Ursula's jaw worked slightly, just slightly. The specific movement of someone receiving something they had stopped expecting and are not yet sure how to hold. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell," she said. "Gregory." A beat. "Gregory." He nodded once, and that was enough. Later that afternoon, Wei Longfeng requested a brief meeting with hotel leadership before his departure for a day trip. Gregory arranged it in the lobby's private salon, a small, quiet room off the main floor used for exactly this kind of moment. Present, Gregory, Diane Calloway, whose expression had not fully recovered since the morning, Sandra Whitmore, the regional vice president who had arrived for a routine inspection and was instead receiving an education, Bo Renshan, standing to Wei's left, and Ursula Munro, requested by name specifically by Wei's team, standing near the window in the same gray uniform she had worn all day. Diane had heard that. Ursula Munro, requested by name. She had stood very still when Priya told her, the way people stand still when something has shifted beneath them, and they are not yet ready to acknowledge it. Wei entered the salon and addressed Gregory briefly, thanking the hotel for its hospitality, noting that the meeting had concluded successfully, and that he looked forward to the continued relationship. Ursula translated. Her voice was steady and even, the same as it had been at 11 a.m., the same as it would be at any hour, because the language had never been a performance. It was simply part of her. Then Wei turned. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small, flat object. A name card, formal, cream-colored, characters on one side, English on the other. He held it for a moment before presenting it. Then he offered it to Ursula with both hands, a slight, deliberate bow. He said, "This card is for a professional, regardless of where she works." The room went absolutely still. Ursula received the card with both hands, correctly, without being coached, without hesitation, with the slight reciprocal bow of someone who had been taught this since childhood, because her grandmother had taught her, in a kitchen in Washington, D.C., that how you receive something matters as much as how you give it. Her hands were perfectly steady. Sandra Whitmore, standing to Gregory's left, was looking at Diane Calloway. Diane Calloway was looking at the floor. The card was cream-colored and cool against Ursula's fingers. She looked at it for one moment. The characters on one side, Wei's name in English on the other, and something moved across her face that she didn't try to hide. Not triumph, not relief. Something older and quieter than either of those things. The feeling of having been seen, fully, correctly, by someone who had no obligation to look. Wei said one more thing before he turned to leave. Bo translated it for the room, the only time Bo had translated anything that day, and he did it slowly, with care. Mr. Wei says, "Talent does not belong to a title. It belongs to the person who carries it." Wei left the salon. His team followed. The door closed softly behind them. For a moment, nobody in the room spoke. Then Sandra Whitmore said, quietly but clearly, "Gregory, I'd like a few minutes with you and Diane before I leave today." It wasn't a request. Diane said nothing. She straightened her jacket, looked at a point on the wall somewhere above Ursula's head, and walked out of the salon ahead of everyone else. That evening, as Ursula crossed the lobby on her way to clock out, Terence Okafor was at the Bellman station near the entrance. He saw her coming. He started to clap, quietly, just him, the way a single person claps at the end of something that genuinely moved them. Not performing it for anyone, just doing it because it was the only response he had. Priya Nolan at the front desk heard it. She joined him. Ursula shook her head, kept walking. But she was smiling, the real one, the one she didn't show at work, the one that started somewhere behind her eyes before it reached her face. She pushed through the lobby doors into the late afternoon. Chicago spread out in front of her, wide, loud, indifferent, familiar. The city she had never left. And in the front pocket of her bag, just visible at the corner, were two things sitting side by side. A cream-colored business card with characters on one side, and the worn spine of a Chinese dictionary that had lived on a housekeeping cart for 6 years without anyone asking what it was. Everything she had always been, and everything she was becoming. 1 week later, Ursula Munro was still at the Aldbourne Grand. But something was different. Her name badge no longer said housekeeping. It said Guest Services Cultural Specialist, a position that had not existed 7 days ago, a position that Gregory Hartwell had written the description for himself, that Sandra Whitmore had approved within 48 hours, and that came with a salary that finally reflected what Ursula had actually been contributing. quietly, invisibly, without acknowledgement, for 6 years. The gray uniform was gone. The cart was gone. She still walked the same marble floors, still knew every corridor, every service entrance, every supply closet on floors 32 through 35. But she walked them differently now. Not because anything about her had changed, because the building had finally caught up to who she already was. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. She didn't get a corner office. She didn't make the news. No one threw a party. What she got was a title that matched her capability, a salary that matched her contribution, and a seat at the table when the hotel's leadership planned for VIP guests who deserved more than a translation app and a nervous 24-year-old with a phone. It was not everything, but it was the beginning of everything. That evening, she called Amara. Amara picked up on the second ring. "Mom, did you speak Mandarin today?" Ursula sat down on the edge of her bed, looked at the business card on her nightstand. Cream-colored, cool, characters on one side. She had placed it there the night she came home and hadn't moved it since. "Yes, baby, I did." "Was it a good day?" She thought about the conference room, the skyline, Way's pen opening, the card received with both hands, Terrence clapping, Priya joining him, Gregory in the hallway, saying her name like it was a fact and not a favor. It was the right day, she said. Amara accepted that the way she always accepted things, completely, without needing more. Ursula hung up, sat in the quiet, and let herself feel it, all of it, without rushing past it or minimizing it or reminding herself to be practical about what it did and didn't mean. She let it be as big as it was. Think about where you work right now. Think about who is around you. Who is in the background? The service corridors, the support roles, the positions that keep everything running while everyone else takes the credit. What do you actually know about them? Not their job title, not their schedule. Them. What they carry. What they know. What they have been waiting, maybe for years, for someone to ask about. You don't have to be a Gregory Hartwell to do what Gregory did. You don't need a title or a corner office or a crisis to force your hand. You just need to be willing to look. Really look. At the people standing 40 feet away from you every single day. Notice them. Ask one real question. And if you have the ability to open a door, open it. Don't wait for the perfect moment. The perfect moment is usually just the moment you decide to act. If this story stayed with you, if you have ever been the person in the gray uniform, or if you recognize yourself as the one who walked past without asking, leave a comment. Tell us which one you were, or which one you want to be. Like this video if you believe talent doesn't care what uniform it's wearing. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe, because there are more stories like Ursula's out there. People who are ready, people who are waiting, people who just need one person to ask the right question. The most expensive language in any room is the one nobody bothered to hear.